Hiya guys, and welcome back to the Black Country Man Cave. Today's episode is going to be one of the first in hopefully many instructional videos. I'm hoping to do a full course of videos teaching you how to use the very basics up to advanced tools. So the first port of call is always a tape measure. Whatever you're doing, you're always going to start with a tape measure, whether it be to measure up the job, measure up the timber you need, measure the gap in something. Doesn't matter what it is, you're almost guaranteed to need a tape measure. And you'll be surprised how many people have not got the first clue how to use one. So today's episode is going to be how to use a tape measure. So first of all, let's look at all the different varieties of tape measures. So they range from a small 5 metre tape measure like that, which I would consider a budget range tape measure. Then you've got your larger 8 metre specialist tape measure. So this one has a magnetic hook on the front. So it's generally used for ceiling work, metal work, things like that, where you need to attach to something that's magnetic. And then you've got your larger 8 metre model. I'd still consider this a budget model, but it's probably just above kind of the budget standard in terms of it doesn't cost a lot, but it's decent quality. And then you work your way up to what I would say is the top dog of tape measures. So Stanley Fatmax are generally regarded as the best tape measures you can buy, certainly in the UK, certainly the most accurate that I've ever used. Some of the other manufacturers maybe is on par. I've not got those tape measures, so I can't tell you, but certainly in terms of accuracy you cannot go wrong with these ones. They're pricey. I think these are about 20 to 25 quid, and then there's a metal version that's a bit more, it's another £5 or something like that. But they're well worth, get my words out, well worth investing if you're looking to get into carpentry or things like that. So to use any type of tape measure, you obviously take the hook and pull out and measure what you want. And all tape measures will have a locking function of some sort. So this one, hold up to the camera, has a button that you push down that locks the tape, so you can pull it out to a specific length, whatever you need. Push. This is quite hard to do in front of the camera. There, I have to do it upside down. Push it down with your thumb, and it locks it in place. Yeah, and then there are other types like this one, which when you pull it out, will automatically hold itself in place, and when you push the button it will automatically retract. These are generally the more common one, but you do get these and they have their functions in comparison to these, but generally you won't go wrong with a push button. Obviously they come in a 5 metre length and an 8 metre length, and it's worth noting that if you're thinking that let's say you want to measure something and it is around about 5 metres, this tape measure you really shouldn't use, because if you extend the tape measure to its absolute full length, they don't like it. It tends to damage the insides. So if you're going to measure something over 5 metres, you need to go for an 8 metre one. If you're measuring something over 8 metres, you can get 10 metre ones. Anything over that, and you'll need to use the fiberglass roll ones, the 100 metre one kind of thing, or a piece of string. If you're measuring something over that distance, you've probably already got something like that. So right, moving on. Okay, so now that we've looked at all the different types of tape measures you can get, we'll now look at the units of measurement that come on those tape measures. So in most cases you will have imperial and metric on your tape measure. So the imperial system uses inches and fractions of inches, so you would have inches, half inches, quarters, eighths, sixteenths and 32s, and then you would go to a foot, a yard and a mile. And the metric system runs in millimetres, centimetres, metres and kilometres. So imperial was invented by Britain in 1824 and was widely used throughout most of the world for over a century, and is mainly only used now in the US, Libya and Myanmar. The rest of the world has generally switched to metric system. There are notable exceptions to that. In the UK we still do use the imperial system in conjunction with metric quite a lot. In particular trades like the plasterboarding trade, certain areas of carpentry, wood suppliers still do use the Imperial quite a lot, so it is still in use. However, metric is now the main system, and that is throughout the rest of the world as well. They all generally mostly use the metric system. So what I'm going to do now is switch to a table view so I can show you in more detail how they work. Okay, so let's take a look at the Imperial system first. So as I said before, the Imperial system goes up in units of an inch, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And then when you've gone to 12, that then makes 1 foot. And then the next 12 would then make 2 foot. The next 12 would make 3 foot, which is also called a yard. So 3 feet to a yard, 12 inches to a foot. And then the inches are then further divided into fractions. So each inch then would have a half inch, a quarter of an inch, an eighth of an inch, a 16th of an inch, and a 32nd of an inch. And each of those lines gets shorter as the increment goes higher. It makes it a lot easier for you to read the tape measure. So the metric system differs from the Imperial system, as instead of using fractions, it uses the decimal system, or increments of 10. So each of these increments marked with a number is a centimetre. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. all the way up the tape measure. And each of those centimetres is further divided into half a centimetre, indicated by the shorter lines halfway in between each number. And then each of those is divided also into increments of 10 to make up millimetres. So that would be 100 mil, 110 mil, 120 mil, 130 mil, and then each of these indicators here would be 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, or 10.5 centimetres. 106, 107, 108, 109, 110 again, and that carries again on all the way up the tape measure. And then when you get to 100 centimetres or 1,000 millimetres, that then makes up 1 metre, and then 1,000 metres makes up then a kilometre. Okay, now that we know the difference between imperial and metric, we now need to learn how to actually measure something. But first of all, we need to understand how the hook works. The hook is the black piece that's on the end of the tape measure. Now, obviously it's designed to hook on to the end of a board or whatever you're measuring. But if you look very carefully, there is a little bit of slop or give in the hook, and this is done intentionally. So the hook moves back and forward to allow for the thickness of the hook itself. So what it allows is when you hook onto the end of the board, the hook moves that way ever so slightly, and what this does is allows for the 0 on the tape measure, which is missing on most tape measures. It allows that to actually sit on the very end of the board, so it gives you a correct measurement. And then when you're measuring an internal, like I'm doing now, up against a wall, the hook moves that way around 1 millimetre to allow again for the thickness of the hook itself. And what this does is allows for the measurement to be accurate, whether you're doing an internal or an external measurement. So if I mark 10 centimetres or 100 mil, whilst hooking on the end of the board, and then mark the same mark again internally, if your tape measure's slop is correct, they should line up. This tape measure is pretty close. I would say at best it's 0.5 millimetre out, which is good enough for most work. This is an old tape measure. It's one I use at work. So over time the slop on this can exaggerate slightly, enough to just throw it out like it is, but 0.5 millimetre is generally close enough to not worry about. So let's flip this board over and we will try some imperial measurements. So if I wanted to cut this board down to 4 inches, I would move down to where the 4 is, the long line, and right where the line is. And a top tip when you're measuring in inches or centimetres is to tilt the tape slightly to the side. So when I'm measuring inches, I would tilt the tape that way, and when I'm doing centimetres, I would tilt the tape that way. This brings the figures closer to the piece and makes your mark more accurate and reduces parallax. So let's mark 4 inches there, and then if I wanted to mark 4.5 inches, it would be there, and then if I wanted to mark 5.25 inches, so I'd go to the 5, and then I would find the quarter, which is halfway between the halfway point, so that would be a quarter. And then let's do 5 and where are we? 1, 2, 3/8 is there, and then 3/4 would be there, and then if you wanted, let's say 5 and 15/16 would be there. And then let's move back down here. So if you wanted to do 3 inches and a 32nd, that would be 1/32, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that would be 6/32, and so on and so forth. And then if we'll go back to doing metric. So that was 100 mil or 10 centimeters. So 110 mil would be there, 120 would be there, 130 would be there, 131 would be there, 134 would be there, 138, and so on and so forth. So let's actually measure something instead of marking it now. So let's measure the length of the timber. Now this timber is just a scrap piece, it's not square, I know that. So I'm going to go to the top. I'm going to hook my tape measure on the top, like so. And then I'm going to come down to this end. I'm going to move over slightly so you can see better. So as you move down the tape measure, again, obviously increments of 1 centimetre. So that would be 10 centimetres or 100 mil. And then that would be 16 centimetres or 160 mil. And then as you count down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that would be 166 millimetres. So if we move to the bottom of the piece, we can now try and measure in imperial. So again, hook the hook on the end, make sure it's nice and tight, and then as you move down the tape measure, obviously 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 whole inches, and then we're down to here. So it's a 16th, so that's 1/16, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that would be 6 inches and 9/16. Okay, so let's get a longer piece. What I'm going to have to do is take this end off camera just so I can get this better in shot. So I'm hooking my end, like so. And we're going to do metric first. So you would obviously count down the tape measure. You've got 20 centimetres there, 30 centimetres there. So then you have 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. That then translates to being 360 mil. You simply add a naught on the end. And then you count 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, and it's somewhere in between the 5 and the 6, so you could say it's 365 mil and a half, but generally you don't use a half measurement, so I would say the closest one there is 365, which is the mark there, or 36.5 centimeters in this case. So then if we then switch to imperial again, so again I'm angling the tape measure to the imperial side to make it easier to see. So obviously you count down to 14 inches, that's your whole number, and then we're then down to this mark here. So that's a ½ inch, that's a ¼ inch, so that is an 1/8 of an inch. So you would then count 1, 2, 3, so it is 14 3/8 inches. If we measure the width of the board, again in metric first, so it is 60mm or 6 centimeters, and then that's 65, 67. So that board is 67mm wide. Switching over to imperial, so you've got 2 inches, and then we're down to that mark there. Moving shot better. So it's 2 inches, that's a ½ inch, that's a ¼ inch, so that's an 1/8 of an inch again. So it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's 2 5/8 inches. So regardless of the length of the item that you're measuring, the method remains the same. Now that you've learnt the basics of a tape measure, there are some other features that are useful to learn. So if you pull the tape measure out until you get to 16 inches, you'll notice that it's highlighted red. This is the joist centre that carpenters use for roofs and floors in the UK. 16 inches on centre. If you move further down, you'll notice that 16 inches further up, at the 32 mark, is another red mark. It's also highlighted red. If you move it further up to the 48 inch mark, or 4 foot, you'll also notice it's highlighted red, and this continues in 16 inch increments all the way along the tape measure. What this does is allow carpenters to very quickly identify joist centres. So imagine that this is the first joist in a stud wall or a ceiling. You would place your tape measure on the centre, and then if I move this over so it's easier to see, then you would slide your next joist so that the 16 is in the centre of your next joist, and then if I slide that over again with your second joist on centre, you can then mark your third joist at 32 inches on centre, and you can do this all the way along. It simplifies the process by highlighting the centres. Now, another feature of a higher end tape measure is if you look where the 19 inch mark is, you'll notice there's a small black diamond. And what this is when you're doing an engineered ceiling, the joist centres can be slightly further apart due to the structural strength of an engineered ceiling. So one is there at 19 3/16, and then the next one then is at 38 6/16, or just slightly over. And that continues again along the tape measure, and for exactly the same reason. So you place one mark on your centre of your first joist, and then you move your second joist then to the second mark on centre. And this is a unified way of doing it throughout the construction industry. Most tape measures also have some useful tricks up their sleeve. So if I place a board down with a screw in the end, I clamp that down, you'll notice that the end of the tape measure, the hook, has a hole in it, and this is specifically designed to hook over the head of a screw, like so. And you can just see the head poking out through there. So there's a couple of uses for this. So if you need to measure something that is a long way from you, and you haven't got anybody to hold the end of the tape measure, you can put a screw into, let's say, a joist, hook your tape on, and then go to the opposite end of the room, keeping light pressure on the tape, and make your measurement or your mark. And then also you can use it to make very rough circles. So if I place that on the 100, as you can see, it's made a very rough circle there. This is particularly useful if you're trying to cut a circle in a large board. Another feature on some tape measures, but not all, is that there's a number written on the side. In this case it's 83mm. And what this is for is when you're measuring two internals, so from one wall to the next, it's difficult to actually measure accurately into the corner, because what you'll find is the tape bends right at the end and you may be a millimetre or two out. What that measurement is the distance from the front of the tape measure here to the back of the tape measure here. What this allows you to do is measure from one wall to another, and by resting the tape against the wall until it stops, lock that off. So that is showing 293mm. You then add that number, 83mm, so it's 6, 7, so it's 376. So if this is accurate, and I'm going to guess it's not, this board should be 376mm long, and as I thought, it is slightly out, so it is 2mm out. Let's get that in shot. So yeah, this is a cheap tape measure, as I said earlier, but with a higher quality one, generally that will be reasonably accurate. Okay, so the last feature to talk about, which is on most tape measures, is that there is a belt hook on the back. And obviously when you're measuring something, marking, whatever you need to do, when you've finished, instead of having to put it down or in your pocket, you can hook it onto your belt or your trousers, and it keeps it nice and safe for you. Okay guys, so the last tip that I'm going to give you is actually one for pencils. So always sharpen your pencil to a fine point, or as fine a point as you can get it, like that, and not a blunt end like that, because what you'll find is that will give you a mark that is wider than a millimetre and will obviously be inaccurate. If you've got a fine tip like that, you can do a fine mark, and especially when you're doing high-end carpentry, your cut will be more accurate. Okay guys, that is the end of this tutorial. Thank you very much for watching till the end. There's going to be a whole series of these, starting with the absolute basics, working my way up through hand tools, all the way up to power tools. So if you've enjoyed this, please consider hitting the like and the subscribe button, and maybe leave me a nice comment down below, or maybe watch one of my other videos which will be coming up shortly. So from me, Mark, in the Black Country Man Cave, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye for now.